All right, welcome back to part 3 of the show, guys. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Steve Bailey from NonLeagueAmerica.com. Of course, it's a website that focuses completely on non-league football here in the United States. Steve, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining the show. We've been looking forward to this for quite a while, actually. So I guess obviously you were giving us a short explanation before we actually were recording about what non-league football is in the United States. If you just want to give us like a real quick run through a condensed version of that again, just to kind of give everybody who's listening an idea of what we mean when we say by non-league football here in the United States.
Yeah, so simply non-league means semi-pro and amateur. You got three full-time pro leagues: MLS, NASL, and USL, and then everything below that is pretty much non-league.
Okay, yeah, and so obviously there's a slew of teams like that all across the country, some more successful than others, some with a bigger fan culture around them than others. And so I guess our question that we have poised to you, because I know it's a lot of fun, there's big ones like Detroit City that a lot of people know about, but in your opinion, what do you think are the top three or four like clubs around the country in terms of fan culture, in terms of performance, as in for non-league clubs, that is, and why?
Yeah, I think you got to look at a lot of different inputs to what makes a club great. I think if you're just going on attendance and going on kind of hype, I think you're going to come to, it's pretty easy to just say, hey, Detroit City, Chattanooga FC, and maybe, those two are kind of like, I think, a cut above just in terms of the attendance, the community support that they have. And then there's a little bit of gap to the next big level of consistently well supported clubs that aren't quite as breakthrough as like Detroit City and Chattanooga. So then next level you got like Fresno, Fresno Fuego, San Francisco City and their supporter ownership. They're now in the PDL. They start out in the like USASA or US Club Soccer affiliated league. I think NorCal Premier League had kind of like worked up from there to the PDL, and but they're doing some interesting stuff. I'm kind of partial to clubs that are supporter owned, which is big overseas, but a nascent movement domestically, but we see it gaining a lot of steam. There's a lot more regulations in the way to make it difficult for people to actually execute supporter ownership in the U.S., but hopefully those type of barriers will be worked around and changed over the course of the next several years too. But I think so then you got like Tulsa Athletics. That's another one in the NPSL. They got a pretty good supporter culture. I'm personally a supporter of the Atlanta Silverbacks, who were a perpetual problem as a full-time pro club, and they got a lot of things going on here in the Atlanta market. But once you set the level of expectation here as a full-time pro NASL team, you want X out of it. But now that they're only an NPSL team, actually they're probably one of the bigger NPSL non-league teams in America now, just because of that level of expectation that kind of changes from D2 to D4. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So 3,000 people is nothing, in NASL, but in NPSL, those same 3,000 people, that's probably top 5 attendances. So they're one of the bigger ones right now. And they own their own stadium, own soccer-specific stadium, which there's some other intricacies in that are making it a little more problematic than it would sound. But that's a good one. Then I really like, all the granular, all the local clubs in the USASA that have really long histories and ethnic ties, especially like in the Northeast. You got clubs like New York Greek American Atlas, Pan Cyprian Freedoms. You just look through that Region 1 U.S. Open Cup qualifying track, and you can search out all these clubs that are around from, first half of the 20th century, founded in the teens and the 20s and the 30s, that have still been, pushing forward and continuing to serve their communities, who may get hopefully get caught up in, the groundswell around the rest of the non-league activity that's kind of taking hold right now in America for the biggest time in its history, really, since the old days. I mean, if you go back and look at those historical photos, you see there was some really big activity back in the 20s and stuff like that. But really, in the last 30 years, this is a brand new movement that sprung up in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it a little bit when you're talking. Obviously, supporter owned or just being a smaller club like this, you see it a lot of the time overseas where clubs will, go out of commission for a season or two. What do you think is the biggest challenge for being a non-league team here in the United States? Is it revenue? Is it money? What do you think is the biggest challenge to having a club be successful and be able to be around for a while?
Well, I think supporter owned is cool because there's problems and there's advantages. The advantages is, that club is not going to pick up and move because the supporters own it and it's rooted in the community, and the supporters are the owners. They, control. If they have a 51% majority stake, then they would control the board. All would be locally based. One individual could sell their shares again and out, but the whole of the supporters having the majority would keep it in that community. So that keeps it local and kind of guarantees its existence, because then, even if they have stadium issues or something like that, that majority ownership could find them another place to play locally within the city. That's just a whole nother way of looking at it. But when you have the traditional American sports model of one majority owner or a few people in an ownership group, they can decide to pick up and move that club somewhere else. And really at their whim. So we see that in big-time U.S. professional sports. We see that occasionally in soccer. And I hate to see it. I feel like once you have an open system and community-based clubs, there's room for them to grow and shrink as their fortunes on the field change, and as they get the time to build up the community support by continuing to exist. One of the big things that, clubs in other parts of the world don't have to worry about is like just continuing to exist and going out of business. You know what I mean? So that's one thing that I think is crucial, and then accommodate clubs would find their level. And I think that there's a hunger for that local community connection that people see how football works in the rest of the world and how it could work here. And people are starting to really embrace, that community connection and make that work here for the first time. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think that the sense of community that is starting to be built around these smaller clubs is definitely seen. However, I'm not the only one that is on this podcast. I know Andrew has a couple questions for you, Steve. Andrew, what do you want to ask here?
Yeah, first, thanks for coming on the show. This is super interesting as someone who loves soccer in the U.S. and soccer culture in the U.S. I guess I'm curious looking forward. I mean, there seems to be two parallel movements here. There's the MLS expansion movement, but there's also this kind of local growth. And I was wondering that, there's a lot of talk about the one MLS expansion, but there's not a lot of talk about the other. And I was wondering kind of what you see going forward, either that's encouraging for further growth or potential obstacles as U.S. soccer in America kind of.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think
grows and evolves.
I think it's two sides of the same thing. Like I think that the explosive MLS team growth in direct response to the groundswell from the community movements. They want to control everything. They want to have their hands in everything. So they want to use the people's natural affinity for locally developing clubs and then use it as a live test market, and then swoop in and kind of corral that off to the side and bring it into their MLS fold by airdropping down a rich owner or finding, a locally based rich owner in the community to kind of take that over. That's their whole model. But I think that their growth is in response to the community groundswell, because all these, they have their stipulations. They want to see their proof, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, all this stuff takes place at the community level. You know, even the most successful NASL teams in terms of attendance, like Indy 11, you know, they did that themselves, and then they filed to jump last round of 12 MLS expansion or whatever. You know, some of them, you know, Sacramento Republic, like that built from the ground up, you know, and it's not supporter owned, didn't build totally from the ground up, but like ownership group came in there, people gravitated to it, found that they really liked it. Obviously they're angling for MLS, but there was no guarantee, but they put something out in the community, people liked it and people wanted to go. So I think that on the other side, the like real grassroots community-based movements, people just want to see their community represented. They see that there's a model in the rest of the world for every community to be represented at some level. And so, you know, even though there's no promotion relegation, we do have the US Open Cup as, you know, an Open Cup tournament like every other nation has. And so that's an opportunity for clubs to be represented and get their shot against higher profile teams. And everybody just wants to see their city on the map, you know? So smaller cities can have a place. And there's many success stories of smaller cities having, you know, stable, community connected teams. You know, look at like, even, you know, I'm a bigger fan of the NPSL than the PDL because the PDL is affiliated with the USL, which is under the clutches of the MLS behemoth. But like, look at, you know, in the bottom part of that in the PDL, look at a team like Des Moines Menace. You know, they've been around for years. They've knocked off many MLS teams in the US Open Cup. They got a long history. They got community support. It may not be that, you know, as sexy as like Detroit City FC with all their smoke and, you know, their whole attitude. But I mean, Des Moines Menace is somebody they consistently get 2,000 people out there in Des Moines, Iowa every summer, you know, for every game. They have a consistent, they've been there for like, I don't want to misspeak, I don't know exactly when, I could Google it when they're founded, but you know, somewhere 10 to 20 years they've been out there doing it. So there's a lot of examples of longevity in the lower divisions and teams that are connected to their communities.
And then just a real quick follow-up, because I know Reed has something he wants to ask too, but what approach would you like to see MLS take that would be maybe more respectful of this grassroots movement? You know, I mean, the ideal form would probably be a promotion relegation system. I'm not convinced that's practical in the US at the moment, but like what other things besides that do you think?
Well, if you look at attendances for second divisions in the world, I saw a graph within the last year. I don't have it in front of me, but NASL is ranked like 5th or 6th in second division attendance in the world. And even with all the instability and all the nonsense going on in NASL, like I think it was a graph on the 2015 attendances, it was an average of like 6,000, probably boosted up by Indy 11, you know, but still second division attendance. Like most of these stadiums, if you look across the world, are not full, you know. Anything close to 10,000 is considered second division stable. So it's not a question of whether we have the people and the resources to support it. It's a question of resetting expectations. MLS will feed you the line that, oh, it's not stable unless we have a consistent 20 to 30,000 people in first and second division. Well, that's not true because that wouldn't be second division. That could just be first division. You know, if you're going to apply a standard that you need first division attendance in order to say that a second division is stable, then that's just not accurate. They also have parachute payments, you know, for relegated teams from first division to second division, like Premier League to Championship. So there's a lot of other mechanisms that are built in there that ensure for an ease of transition in a promotion and relegation system, so you wouldn't just get your bottom pulled out from under you. But the whole system is artificially kept much lower than the potential of America, and MLS is complicit in doing that from the start, because MLS shouldn't be worried about their 25,000 attendances. They should be, this is the United States. This is a huge country with a massive interest in soccer. If they would actually open up the system, first division would be competing with the NFL. You know, people would, and the investors there, the billionaires would then want to invest to bring, you know, Messi and Ronaldo and fill up 60, 80,000 seat NFL stadiums. Like if you don't think that we were competing for A1 talent, we could fill up those stadiums, I think it's just not looking at reality. That's not rose-colored glasses. That's like, people know the difference. That's the thing. MLS doesn't give the soccer watching public enough credit. Like, the people know that the system is being artificially capped with low salaries, you know, kind of holding the whole market back. So first division could be much better, and then that would actually rise the second and third divisions too. So the whole everything is, I think, being artificially kept lower than it could be right now. I really believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, no, I really respect that. I really like I've never really considered the point of respecting the groundwork that's been put in by when larger franchises markets are coming in. The only issue that I see with a full fluid pyramid system is just the size of the country, which is just something that's not really seen anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't know if there's an easy way around that factor of having lower league teams having to move so far.
Well, that's a great point, but I think there is precedence all around the world for lower divisions to be regionally split. So in smaller countries, that split generally takes place farther down the pyramid. Like in England, every league is National League for the first 5 tiers, including the first tier of non-league at the 5th. It splits at the 6th, and then into 2, North and South. And then in the 7th, those 2 split again into 3. So that it gets regionalized at that lower level. But in the US, where we have these travel issues, I mean, they're legitimate issues, but why couldn't we split at the 2nd tier? Why couldn't, you know, whatever the 2nd tier in the open system is, it doesn't have to be NASL, but let's just, for the sake of what we know, call it NASL. Like, why not just split that 2nd tier into an East and West, 2 parallel 20-team leagues that each get their champion promoted into the first division, and the bottom 2 from the first division get relegated into the 2nd. Like, there you've automatically bisected the country. At the 3rd division, you could split those East and West into, you know, 2 leagues there. So let's say the East, now you split it into, at the 3rd division, you could split it into a northern half and a northeast and a southeast. Boom, that's it. Like in the West, you could split it into a Midwest and a Far West, you know? So
I love it.
Right. I mean, it's pretty simple.
I love that. Yeah, and I think with this, we had this massive expansion bid, which is kind of, I don't know, I didn't totally buy it. I don't really like what they did there. I thought that was a little bit of a cluster. But does that progression of the MLS, does that encourage you for this larger market?
No, because they're trying to gobble them all up to prevent an open pyramid. Like, the reason why they're expanding so fast right now is to get everybody into their circle and have control to prevent the organic rise of these teams. Because as more and more teams, you know, let's say, I don't want to exaggerate too much, so let me temper my enthusiasm a little bit, but let's say that outside of MLS, there's, within the next 5 years, there's 10 teams that are consistently getting between 10 and 15,000 people. You know, I don't think that's unrealistic, because if you look at right now outside of MLS, Indy, Louisville, Cincinnati, you know, across USL and NASL, any league, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's probably somewhere around 5 that are, say, Sacramento, that are consistently kind of pushing north of that 10,000. You know, who's to say that there's a whole nother group that are somewhere between that 5 and 10, right? So who's to say, you know, Detroit City falls into that one.
Yeah.
So who's to say that there's not 10 teams consistently above 10,000, and and that they automatically, just like you hit this mark and then automatically you have to be absorbed into a single entity? What if and take orders from somebody who doesn't really know your club, your fans, your community? The central, single entity part of MLS is the worst part, because it takes away a lot of the local decision making that independent clubs can potentially have. They should be out there. Clubs should be independent, competing in the world market for talent and naturally finding their level. But when they have to kind of assimilate to that central leadership, a lot of the uniqueness that allowed them to grow from 0 to 10,000 is going to be lost, and that's what makes it tougher for teams to grow from 10,000 to 20,000, 20,000 to 30,000. If you took that same culture and freedom that clubs have up to their 10,000 and then just gave them more resources and more freedom to continue to operate the way that they're operating, this whole system might grow a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah.
I got one other point. Sorry, real quick.
No,
another thing that MLS, the most egregious thing that MLS does, and some people kind of maybe don't talk about it in as nuanced a way, but it really is they don't respect the diversity of the game in the United States. They have no spot in MLS and USL for ethnic affiliated clubs. They don't want to see a Hispanic team rise up to really compete with the other teams in the US. They really want to keep it within their investment circle. So that's another thing that an open pyramid does. It allows any club a shot. So that really speaks to what's supposed to be, the idea of a meritocracy of America. Should be in an open system, then any club affiliated with any ethnicity or not could get their shot. But like that's one of the differences between, if you look between the USL / PDL / MLS and NPSL and other leagues. Specifically, the USL and the MLS do not allow ethnic affiliated branding in any of their teams. That's why, for example, there's a team that actually this is one of the best lower league soccer specific stadiums in America. They're called Western Mass Pioneers. They're in Ludlow, Mass. This is a Portuguese affiliated team. Now they have another club that it's really, Western Mass Pioneers is really part of a larger local Portuguese club called Grêmio Lusitano. And they had to rebrand to join the USL as Western Mass Pioneers. Western Mass Pioneers has no history in the community. Well, the club does because the people know it, but the brand name Western Mass Pioneers means nothing, but it was required by USL in order to join like the USL D3 Pro League or whatever it was called at the time.
It's almost a mask over the club.
Right. It's a mask over the club's actual culture. Like, why would you ask somebody to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, and then just I think to kind of round it up, are you hopeful for an open pyramid within our lifetime?
Oh, within our lifetime? Absolutely. I'm 36. I'm hopeful for an open pyramid before I even get very old. Like, I think we're going to have an open pyramid within the next 10 years. Really. I think there's just so much. They can't continue to keep it in a bottle. Like, there's so much energy and enthusiasm at the lower levels. And especially as you look at these lower leagues and the teams that really get like very little to no fan support, we're seeing these type of teams get an interest and get their 200 to 500 people out. And that's what's really pushing up all the levels, right? So when these new teams that are popping up, like AFC Mobile, you know what I mean? They haven't even played a game yet. Bear Fight FC, the supporter-owned club out of Wilmington, Delaware, that started out as a supporter group for the Philadelphia Union that just, was hungry for more, and wanted to do their own thing. You know what I mean? So as more of these clubs just get a baseline, consistent couple hundred people, and that starts multiplying out to the hundreds of clubs that are out there and that are getting eyeballs, it just forces everything up. It's gonna be a groundswell from the bottom up.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely because the investor part of the MLS is kind of a little faceless, to be fair. But I think the more the lower leagues develop, the more the moneyed interest will relax and kind of just accept it and let it go. So
especially look at the MLS, all the money they got to put into their franchise fee. We want $150 million for you to. What if you just told, insert name of rich owner, hey, take that 150 million and invest it in players in the club, invest it in your own stadium, invest it in salaries, and then don't artificially hold the salaries down to like 10 million for your entire squad, and put 150 million to players that'll allow you to compete in the world market, bring in players that people recognize, that people care, compete with Liga MX, for talent, compete with, maybe you're not competing with the Premier League, but maybe you're competing with, some other, teams in Europe, Asia. Like, people know better. They just want to see the real deal. That's what I think the MLS, why the ratings are so low, why ratings are decent even in the mornings for Premier League and for, La Liga, because people know the difference. People know what they want to see, the best football, or at least at something approximating the best football. They don't want to see something that's worse than what it has to be. And that's what MLS is right now. It's something that's worse than what it has to be.
Yeah, I think that Don Gardner and MLS do have a stranglehold on soccer and the development of it right now. Steve, we'll get you out of here on this. If you had to pick one non-league team to stir the pot in the U.S. Open Cup this year, obviously we're into preseason. Teams have started to get their squads together. Which MPSL or other non-league team do you think is most likely to stir the pot a little bit in this year's Open Cup?
I probably got too much. I don't know if you can see that. I probably got too much glare behind me. Atlanta Silverbacks, man. Atlanta Silverbacks. I believe that they have a really unique opportunity this year as a second year, kind of recalibrated at their NPSL level. They didn't win the regular season last year, but they actually did win the trophy for the South Atlantic Conference, having won through the NPSL playoff. They got out to Miami and went down to Miami, played Miami United, which is another NPSL team that knocked him out. And then Miami went to Chattanooga, got knocked out by Chattanooga. But I think that now in year 2 of this NPSL project, they got a lot of continuity. A lot of players from last year's team are returning. And the other thing that makes Atlanta Silverbacks different is, they don't use college players. So they are a real kind of semi-pro team. So the NPSL doesn't have a lot of rules and restrictions. The only restriction that they have is that 95% of these teams use college players. You can't mix college players with pros, but if you want to not use college players, you can use all pros. So that's what the Silverbacks and just a tiny handful of other teams actually do. Actually, I think Miami's one of them too that uses pros. Now, they don't pay these guys a lot of money. A lot of them, they just provide more money and support than qualifies them to be amateur. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly how it works, to be honest with you. Like if it's they get paid for goals scored, or if it's just extra stipends beyond their housing stipend and stuff like that. But they are considered a pro team. A lot of these guys played overseas. Their left back, Kamar Brown, played in the Jamaican Premier League. Again, not the highest league in the world, but still, pretty stiff competition. And they have guys that played in leagues in Africa, guys who played in the Ghana Premier League, all sorts of stuff like that. Guys just looking for their shot. So I think that in year 2 of their program, look for Atlanta Silverbacks, especially if they don't get shipped out. Last year they got shipped out. They're supposed to do the draw regionally, but there was an odd number of teams regionally in the South, and so one team was going to have a crazy travel. And that last year, that was Atlanta Silverbacks, who ended up traveling to Reading, Pennsylvania, Me and my fellow Atlanta Ultra supporter Christian, we went up there, and that's where we brought out the Illumigulati banner for the first time. But I don't know if y'all seen that, but they ended up not having all their guys in camp because that game was the first game before even the first regular season game last year. This year, the first round is after the first game of the NPSL season. The first week of the NPSL season in the South region is May 6th, and then that following Tuesday or Wednesday, May 10th, is the first U.S. Open Cup game. So if they can get through that first one and get another match at home, I think sky's the limit. And what I really want to see, and all the people in Atlanta want to see, is a showdown between Atlanta Silverbacks and Divided. We call them Atlanta Divided.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining the show. Guys, make sure that you check out NonLeague America online at nonleagueamerica.com, and make sure you check them out on Twitter at NonLeagueUSA. That is going to do it for us for the show today, though, guys. Make sure you're following the pod on Twitter at Point to the Spot with the number 2. Of course, you can find us all individually on Twitter. Reed, where can they find you?
At That One Kid Reed.
And Andrew, where can they find you?
At Andrew BAHL.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter at actual Jack Kelly. I am actually Jack Kelly after all. Steve, thank you again for joining the show. We really appreciate you coming on and talking non-league with us.
Can I get one more plug in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just want to let y'all know that one thing that we're going to be doing a lot more this year is actually getting out there and doing more in-game branding with NonLeague America at various spots around the country, sponsoring tailgates. We got signage, pitch-side signage going up in multiple locations around the country this year. So we're all kicking it off. You're going to get an exclusive. This is just came all to fruition yesterday. We haven't even announced on Twitter yet. The first promotion that we're doing, we're going out to Bear Fight FC in Wilmington, Delaware, and on March 5th for their first preseason friendly. We're going to be out there. We're making a documentary. It used to be my shitty half-assed camera work, but now we got professional documentary filmmaker coming in, making a documentary about this, doing a little background on Bear Fight FC. We're going to have NonLeague America signage. We're going to be out there selling our wares, scarves and T-shirts and stuff. So come through if you're in Wilmington, Delaware. We're going to have the Honey's Cocina tacos, selling all sorts of varieties of shrimp tacos and all this stuff pitch side. So come check us out in Wilmington, Delaware, March 5th. Joint production between Bear Fight FC, NonLeague America, and Bear Fight FC and NonLeague America.
Well, we love to hear it. And so thank you all for listening. Again, Steve, thank you for joining the show. And until the midweek with some more UCL action, everybody take care and have a great start to the week.